I like movies. Personally, I feel like they're a lot of fun to watch. It's fun to watch good movies, bad movies, just alright movies. It's fun to watch something that was specifically made to entertain you for 2 hours. And they all come from Hollywood. Hollywood is the birthplace of cinema as we know it, and it is truly wonderful, with shining skies, beautiful people, and the air of showbiz around it. Hollywood seems like a paradise for people to truly live in bliss. Except that's not quite all true. As I'm sure you know, nothing is as good as it's made out to be. Hollywood obviously isn't perfect, nor is. However, I can say that Hollywood is much worse than anywhere else, and has been from its very founding as a showtown. Corruption, drugs, abuse, and greed are just some of the awful things you'll find in abundance in Hollywood. It's simply a part of Hollywood. What kind of people live in this awful place? What are the people that thrive, and who are the ones that don't? Luckily, we know exactly the kind of people that live in Hollywood, and there are two. In Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West, the first kind are described very simply. They're the people who are masquerades, who aren't real people but rather pretending to be something that they're not. He puts it as this.
A great many of the people wore sports clothes, which were not really sports clothes. Their sweaters, knickers, slacks, blue flannel jackets with brass buttons were fancy dress. The fat lady in the yachting cap was going shopping, not boating. The man in the Norfolk jacket and Tyrolean hat was returning not from a mountain but an insurance office. And the girl in slacks and sneakers with a bandana around her head had just left a switchboard, not a tennis court.
The book in this scenario is obviously portraying the masquerades of people that live in Hollywood, the rich and famous, the ones you think of when you think of Hollywood. However, Day of the Locust focuses on a different kind of people, but to understand them, we'll get a sense of what they're longing for. And to do that, we look at Hollywood Babylon by Kenneth Anger. He goes into real-life stories of early Hollywood stars, which is awfully convenient, seeing this also where we are starting. So, first things first, let's take a look into One of my favorite terms is nostalgia glasses, or rose-colored glasses, or whatever the heck you want to call it, just because of how well it describes that kind of feeling. The feeling of looking back on something in the past and thinking it was just so much better than it actually was, like how people think Friends was genuinely funny or that The Predator is a good movie. Obviously it's not true because Friends is awful without a laugh track, and I feel like there's not much need to explain why The Predator is bad. We just look back on those times fondly, and that makes us think that these things are better than they really are. And the same spectacles are over everyone's eyes when it comes to Hollywood. I don't know about you, but personally, before now, I always seen the idea of Hollywood corruption and corporate agendas as more of a recent thing. Like, when I thought of early Hollywood, I always pictured a goofy Charlie Chaplin movie and Model Ts and weird 1930s dialect. And while this is how I, and probably most people, thought about the early years of Hollywood, the truth is, the place sucked. Like, from the get-go, the place is an absolute mess. Drinking, drugs, orgies, crime, domestic abuse, pedophilia, rape, misogyny. So much, in fact, the more common nickname wasn't La La Land, but rather the City of Sin. It was so bad that they had to hire a movie star, Will H. Hayes, president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, to try and improve public image and clean up Hollywood. And that is with the largest air quotes you can find. Making it a little bigger? There we go. These famous stars would come and do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted to, and there is no better example of this than Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. I first heard about Roscoe Arbuckle while reading Hollywood Babylon for this very video, and he was easily one of the standout stories from the book, and I would highly recommend reading it. But for our purposes, I'll be giving a briefer version. The best way to describe Arbuckle nowadays would be as a high-class Paul Blart. Rather than going through malls and hot dogs with the joke being he's fat, it was more like going to high-end parties and eating caviar with the joke being he's fat. And just like Paul Blart, people loved him. However, there was a side to Arbuckle that Kevin James doesn't have. The man was a party animal, and not at all in a good way. In fact, when he was first signed on, he was almost immediately torn down when at a signing party, which included over $1,000 worth of call girls, a nosy neighbor looked in to see Arbuckle and the girls stripping on the table and called the cops. Lucky for Arbuckle, some of the other attendees at this party just happened to be Adolf Zucker, Jesse Lasky, and Joseph Schneck, the founders of Paramount, who ended up paying $100,000 to the Boston DA to keep the matter shushed up. After that, though, Arbuckle was doing very well and much better at keeping his escapades under wraps. He even got a $3 million contract with Paramount. And quick side note, all this money he's making / paying is 1913 to 1921 money, meaning that adjusting for inflation, he paid almost $26,000 in call girls that one time, $2.5 million to that DA, and would have been making $42 million with this new contract. So he decided to celebrate this contract with, you guessed it, a party. However, unlike his other parties, this one had invited a new and upcoming actress, Virginia Rapp. Arbuckle had his eye on Virginia for a long time. He had asked her to be his leading lady in multiple films and insisted she come celebrate with him. During the drinking and dancing and showgirls and drugs and all the other festivities, Arbuckle wheeled a tipsy Virginia into an adjoining hotel room, next to the one where the main party was taking place. Later, the party was interrupted by sounds of screams and moaning from the other room. Eventually, Arbuckle emerged, and people went to check on Virginia. Virginia's clothes were in tatters, and she was rushed to the hospital. She slipped into a coma with damaged female organs, including a ruptured bladder, which led to her death from peritonitis. Later, Arbuckle was accused of the rape and murder of Virginia, but faced no charges due to his lawyers smearing Virginia's character and being able to pay bail. But while Arbuckle was free, he did face punishment. His reputation as a lovable film star for children was destroyed. His $3 million contract with Paramount absolved. His name became taboo in Hollywood and was banned from acting, and people never let him forget that day, and died as one of the most hated people in Hollywood. Arbuckle's story is a horrible one, but it's the best example to show how Hollywood was and still is. On the screen, Fatty Arbuckle was a lovable, jolly man for your children to watch and love, but behind it he was a cruel and heavy drinker and womanizer. Just like Arbuckle, Hollywood puts on a nice face, one that looks innocent and friendly, but in reality, deep down, is really a monster. Arbuckle wasn't the only monster in old Hollywood. Remember how I mentioned Charlie Chaplin earlier? Turns out he was perving on a 7-year-old and got her pregnant at 14. Remember Hayes, the movie star, who was supposed to clean up Hollywood? Well, he was actually a corrupt politician known for taking bribes in President Harding's cabinet. The list goes on and on, even into today. Kevin Spacey, star of hit shows and movies like Baby Driver and House of Cards, things I have personally enjoyed, was charged with sexually assaulting an 18-year-old boy. Amber Heard, after accusing her ex-husband Johnny Depp of abuse, was found out to actually be the abusive one in their relationship. The rich and famous who live in Hollywood were awful before, but now they just have the means and the power to do whatever they want. But as I said, there isn't just one kind of person in Hollywood. There are two. Not everyone in Hollywood is rich and famous. Most aren't. So now that we've had a look into the Hollywood masqueraders, it's time to look at Now, if you'll harken back with me to the introduction, you'll remember that I said Day of the Locust describes two kinds of people that live in Hollywood. Well, now we got the idea what the first kind of people are like, let's take a look at the somberly titled The People Who Come to California to Die. Todd Hackett describes those who have come to die as such.
Scattered among these masquerades were people of a different type. Their clothing was somber and badly cut, bought from mail-order houses, while the others moved rapidly, darting into stores and cocktail bars. They loitered on the corners or stood with their backs to the shop windows and stared at everyone who passed. When their stare was returned, their eyes filled with hatred. At this time, Todd knew very little about them, except that they had come to California to die.
This is the other kind of people that Hollywood ruins, the normal ones. The normal people that go to Hollywood trying to become famous or rich or a star. These are the people that the Day of the Locust focuses on. With all clarification, Day of the Locust is a work of fiction, but even so, it gives us an idea of what life is like for these people. Day of the Locust stars, as I've mentioned, Todd Hackett, and he's an artist who has come to Hollywood to work on his painting that he has already titled The Burning of Los Angeles. In it, he wants to capture the people he's so interested in. Todd is also simping over an old silent film star, Faye Greener, who's trying to find work in a new age of movies with sound. Todd is constantly tagging along on dates with Faye and her boyfriends throughout the book and trying to get her to sleep with him. Instead of donating hundreds of dollars to her Twitch stream, though, he instead cares for her dying father. But fast-forwarding through the book, Todd finds himself and his compatriots in a riot during a film premiere, being jostled about, and it's in this time we are described Todd's painting of him and his friends being chased by the people who came there to die. Now, why do I bring this all up? Because the entire ending of the book is extremely ironic. Todd's painting of him and his friends running from the people who came there to die without realizing that his friends and now him are those exact people. He can't see that he is in the exact situation he is painted, simply on the other sides. I mean, Faye's father is literally dying in Los Angeles as a failed actor. It's not a hard thing to spot if you look into it. But it does show what is going on in the minds of people who went there to die. It shows us the reason they're there is to become one of the masqueraders. They want to be just as rich and just as famous as all of them, but are failing. They were tricked into thinking that Hollywood was this grand place where anyone can become a star, but they were lied to. Hollywood is the place where dreams come to die, not to flourish. Sadly, I can't go into Hollywood and see anything for myself about the common people who live there, but what I can do is go look at the statistics and facts online and see how bad it is. According to the LA Times, there are at least 2,000 people who are homeless in Hollywood, and I add at least because when it comes to calculating homelessness, it is extremely difficult due to multiple factors such as pride and timing, but mainly just being hard to find. So the real number of homeless people in Hollywood could be anywhere between 2,000 and 10,000. Then, on areavibes.com, it puts the unemployment rate at 7.4%, which means that 6,300 people are out of a job in the City of Dreams, which is 58% higher than the national average. Not only that, but the cost of living in Hollywood is 27% higher than the national average. And with the average income per household in Hollywood being $39,000 a year, which also happens to be 29% lower than the national average, that means an average person living in Hollywood is way under what is considered middle class in LA, California, and the US as a whole. And on top of being expensive to live in and find a job in Hollywood, it is also a dangerous place to be. Hollywood's crime rate is 112% higher than the national average, with the violent crimes being 243% higher. That means in Hollywood you have a 1 in 19 chance of being a victim of some sort of crime. But if you thought the awfulness ended there, you'd be sorely mistaken, because it bleeds into Hollywood's education system. In Hollywood, a whopping 79%, which is 1,793 kids, score more than 5% lower the average child. But wait, according to a 2-year study by the UCLA, the Hollywood film and television industry produces more pollution than any other county in Los Angeles. It also found that the industry produces 140,000 tons of ozone and diesel emissions per year. So in conclusion, Hollywood sucks as a place to live. While it has the dazzling lights on the forefront, the closer you look, you're able to see what's wrong. How so many people are poor and, like Todd Hackett, may not even realize it.
Okay, great. Hollywood is the worst, but so what? Who cares? What was the point of hearing me ramble for this long if none of it matters? Well, the point was mainly to simply expose all of these facts at their face value and try to bring a greater understanding to the town so many people just think of as the place where movies were made. To show that it's not all as perfect as it seems, so that maybe we'll cherish the good things more, call out the bad, and accept the alright things.